So call it drain the swamp, or as Steve Bannon put it, deconstructing the administrative state. But make no mistake, there is a new language being spoken in D.C. on day 56 of the first 100. And it goes like this.
This administration intends to change course from a soft power budget to a hard power budget. And that's a message that our adversaries and our allies alike should take.
So welcome, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum, and this is the first 100 days. Today, the new director of the Office of Management and Budget, Mick Mulvaney, said he literally looked at the president's promises one by one on the campaign trail, and he wrote a budget for them.
I'm going to cut spending. We're going to cut spending big league.
It's a simple message, by the way. I put myself in the shoes of that steel worker in Ohio. The coal mining family in West Virginia, the mother of two in Detroit. Can I really go to those folks, look them in the eye and say, look, I want to take money from you and I want to give it to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
I will end the wasteful government spending and hold the bureaucrats accountable.
The president is beholden to none of that. The president is drafted a budget for the entire nation.
In my first budget report to Congress, I am going to ask for the elimination of the defense sequester.
We had an America First candidate. You now have an America First president, and it shouldn't surprise anybody that we have an America First budget.
So can they make that happen? We will talk about that in just a moment. But first, Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts takes us through this today. Hi, John.
Martha, good evening to you. You know, that the new budget that the president released today can be described in this way. Big increases in hard power, big cuts to soft power. Let's take a first look at some of those big ticket hard power items. $54 billion increase in defense spending. That breaks down into $52 billion for the Pentagon and $2 billion to be given to other agencies who are involved in defense. Homeland Security ups its budget by $3 billion. Veterans Affairs gets a little more than $4 billion. There's also $1.5 billion in there for beginning construction of the wall as well. Massive cuts on the other side to some of the most important departments we have. State Department gets a 28% decrease in funding. That's a $10 billion cut. EPA will see a 31% decrease in its funding. That will call for the elimination of some 3,200 positions. HHS, 17.9% decrease in restructuring of the National Institutes of Health. And HUD gets a 13.2% decrease. And in that, it works out to about $6 billion in total. And in that is a cut to the $3 billion Community Block Grant Program. One of the things the Community Block Grant Program does is it gives money to states, some of which goes to fund programs like Meals on Wheels. Mick Mulvaney, the budget director, says he can't burden taxpayers with that sort of spending. Listen.
We can't do that anymore. We can't spend money on programs just because they sound good and great. Meals on Wheels sounds great. Again, that's a state decision to fund that particular portion to it, to take the federal money and give it to the states and say, look, we want to give you money for programs that don't work. I can't defend that anymore.
Mulvaney also said it wouldn't be compassionate to take money on the other end from people who are struggling hard to make ends meet and give it to programs that just aren't working. Mulvaney says that in order to craft the budget, Martha, he listened to literally everything that the president said on the campaign trail over the months and crafted a budget policy item for just about everything the president said. And that's what we saw released today, Martha.
Interesting. And it was also pretty interesting in the briefing room today, John, as you well know. It was an explosive White House briefing today, especially for Sean Spicer, as he doubled down on President Trump's claims that he was, quote, wiretapped by his predecessor, President Obama. Those claims persisting despite both the House and today the Senate intelligence leadership coming out and saying that there is no evidence that that happened. Watch.
That there was no, hold on. I understand that, Jonathan. And where was your passion and where was your concern when they all said that there was no connection to Russia? Where was it then? You crickets from you guys, because at the end of the day, when hold on. I'm making it. I'm trying to answer your question, Jonathan. If you can calm down.
We have done plenty of reporting on all of this.
But you want to cherry pick one commentary, one piece of commentary.
Associates of the president to the Russians, that has all been looked at. And
no, wait. How do you know all this? How do you seem to be such an expert in this?
Can you help us all by calling up Peter right now?
No, I understand. I actually call the questions. Alexis, if you don't want to answer the question, I can call on somebody else. No, thank you.
Back to John Roberts at the White House. What was that like today, John?
It was the craziest thing I've seen at the White House since the president's press conference a few weeks back. Every day something else happens. Let me just give you the backstory to that. About 15 minutes before the Spicer briefing was supposed to take place, Senators Burr and Warner came out and said they didn't see any evidence for any kind of wiretapping or surveillance, specifically of Trump Tower. So the press secretary and his staff spent the next hour Googling everything they possibly could so that he would come out with a lot of ammunition. Spicer had basically a sermon that he wanted to deliver from the podium there, and he knew that he was going to get the question. And when John Carl, my colleague from ABC, asked it, he went on for 7 minutes. He wanted to get out everything that they had Googled the previous hour, and he did. And then, of course, it got contentious because a lot of people thought that he was stonewalling. I think the reality to this is, Martha, and I know that some people aren't going to want to hear this, but the evidence to back up the president's assertion that there was wiretapping or some sort of surveillance specifically of Trump Tower is exceedingly thin. It may be that there was some incidental surveillance of people who might have been going in and out of Trump Tower because, they have transcripts apparently of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn speaking on the telephone with the Russian ambassador. That had to come from somewhere. And there are other people who were loosely connected to the Trump campaign over the course of probably the first part of last year who have said to me they think they were being surveilled and their cell phone was in and out of Trump Tower a few times during the course of the year. So may find that out, but any direct surveillance, there's no proof of that just yet.
Yeah, I mean, the big question is whether or not it's all based on the news reports. Sean Spicer read them today. The president referenced them in the interview that he did with Tucker. He said, well, that's how I know. But then he said, over the next couple of weeks, you're going to hear some pretty interesting things. So that's sort of the bucket that hasn't been filled yet. And I know you're on top of all of that. John, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
You got to point out, too, that every intelligence official who has been asked has said there's no evidence that happened.
That's right.
There may be news reports of it, but nobody from Intel has said that.
John, thank you.
Thanks.
So let's bring in our panel on what's been a very busy day in Washington. Chris Direwalt is Fox News politics editor, Richard Fowler, senior fellow at the New Leaders Council and Fox News contributor, and Charles Hurt, political columnist at the Washington Times and a Fox News contributor as well. Gentlemen, welcome. It was a very spicy news briefing today, we could say. But I do want to start with this budget because, there was a lot in there. And you can pick it apart. It basically leaves the overall budget the same, even though they talk about cuts. But Chris, let me start with you. There was definitely language and a way of looking at spending in terms of taking it from the taxpayer and giving it to someone else that we don't really hear put that way quite often.
Absolutely. If conservatives were lukewarm or even upset about Trump Care and the health insurance plan and all that jazz, this is something that will make them stand up and cheer. Mm-hmm. This is the most conservative, conceptually conservative. I think you've nailed it. It's not about the dollars. It's about the concept of what the scope and role and appropriate place for the federal government is in American life. Yeah. This is the most, by those standards, the most conservative budget ever put forward by a chief executive.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about slashing programs 28-30%. And Richard, the argument that was made was, well, you know what? We don't have the money for all this stuff, folks. We just don't. So we need to figure out where it's going to come from. And I know you feel strongly that they're taking it from the wrong place, right?
I do think they're taking it from the wrong place. I think bolstering up our Defense Department when our Defense Department is pretty muscular as it is already is not the right move. But here's a silver lining in this cloud, Martha, for the audience at home. Trump says he's the guy who's the art of the deal. So maybe he's creating a budget that's absolutely, positively so toxic that he knows it's not going to get to the Hill and he could get something more like what he wants without much movement, right? So maybe that's it. But if not, I find this budget to be really, really heartrending for the seniors who depend on Meals on Wheels every day to get their dinner, or the kids that wake up and watch Sesame Street, or the African nations that depend upon the United States for there to be able to eat. And I think all those are zeroed out in this budget. And I think the one other point that I want to make here is I spent a month in Africa with foreign service officers who do the work of maintaining peace every day when our military isn't there. A 31% cut, or over a 30% cut to the State Department and our diplomacy, by far is one of the worst things that we can do in a world where China
I hear you,
is
but you know what? Let me bring in Charlie Hurt here. Interesting things happen when companies are told that they have to cut by 25%. They find places to spend less money and still get the stuff done in order to make some money, right?
The notion that a company could have a $20 trillion debt on their books and not have to cut things dramatically at every department is absolutely unheard of in the private sector. And so for Donald Trump to step in here and do that, and to make these dramatic cuts, I think Chris is exactly right. It is the most conservative budget that I've ever seen in my time in Washington, because politicians, they love to give stuff away, and it doesn't matter if it's their money or somebody else. In fact, actually, it does matter. They prefer it to be other people's money. They love to give it away, and they think that spending it on cartoons or shrimp jogging on treadmills or silent Shakespeare productions, they think that's a great expenditure.
Which are sometimes better than audible ones, by the way. No, I love Shakespeare. But, this whole concept that it's wrong to take something from a single mother of two in the form of taxes, or a minor who is trying to put food on his table, in order to give it to a program that is failing, is, I think, somewhat a revolutionary thought. This is not the kind of language that we hear spoken in Washington every day.
Or not even failing. If it's you're just taking the money from that mother who has a single mother with a child in order to give it to some program that maybe it's a great program, it's still something that we ought to sit back and say, is this right?
Yeah.
And that's what makes.
I just want to circle back one more time, Starwell. I do want to get your thoughts on the other part of this briefing today, which was combustible. It was something else. So what did you think?
So, this is we see the side of Trump that gives hope for his supporters. This is going to work, that this budget, maybe he's doing deals, he's back to selling the healthcare plan. And then you see the stuff that we are reminded of, the troubles he had when he was running for president, when he gets stuck on something, or when he first came into office and there's 5 million secret votes, so I really did win the popular vote, or I had the biggest crowd for the inaugural, or all that stuff. The problem is his defenders have enough work to do defending him on substantive matters. When they have to devote their time, effort, and energy to defending the president on this stuff, this pointless stuff that is matters of pride, when you do that, you are burning energy and burning capital that is desperately needed to advance an agenda that is the most ambitious I've ever seen.
Yeah, you're gumming up the gears. There's no doubt about it, and you're wasting 7 minutes recounting all of this today. And as Tucker said last night, Charlie, and quick thought, why don't you wait till you have the evidence and then present it, rather than sort of spilling all this stuff all over the place and making everybody talk about it all the time in your press briefing, when you'd rather have them talking about your budget?
Sure, absolutely. But, a lot of people have gotten hung up on the word wiretapping and the Trump Tower. The bottom line does remain, though, there have been a lot of reports out there about surveillance of people, either the campaign or people around the campaign of a political opponent of a sitting president. And those are serious charges, and there has been reporting to at least suggest that there may be something there. And that's alarming.
I mean, if there's something there, there's something there. We'll see it eventually when it comes out. I got to go. Thank you, Richard. You're going to get the first word next time. I'm sorry. I gave you short shrift, buddy. Good to see you all. So still ahead, First Lady Melania Trump, the victim of 2 separate attacks from a rapper and a liberal cable host. Governor Huckabee and Lisa Booth sound off on the double standard that is playing out there. Plus, could the American Health Care Act be turning a corner? With the president voicing his continued support last night in Nashville and signaling that he wants folks to come together, is it off life support? We'll see. That does not include House Freedom Caucus Chair Mark Meadows. He is up next, and he'll tell us why he thinks the whole thing should be scrapped.
Something I haven't seen in a long time. This president is getting deeply involved. The president of the United States is the one who's been mediating this, hashing out our differences so that we can get to a consensus.
The bill that I will ultimately sign, and that will be a bill where everybody's going to get into the room and we're going to get it done. We'll get rid of Obamacare and make health care better for you and for your family.
That was last night in Nashville. President Trump at a rally saying that he hopes to bring everybody together and to hammer out this Republican health care bill. He believes it can get done. And with the future of Obamacare repeal at stake, some are suggesting tonight that perhaps the replacement legislation could be possibly turning a corner. Maybe they can get this done. In moments, we're going to talk to the House Freedom Caucus chairman, Mark Meadows, who basically says that he thinks there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on this thing. He's not too crazy about it. But we begin with Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, live on Capitol Hill tonight. Hi, Mike.
Martha, good evening. House Speaker Paul Ryan says his focus is on finding the votes to pass this health care replacement plan in the House.
We constantly get feedback. We constantly get suggestions from members. and we're working at bridging those gaps to make improvements in the bill so that so we have a bill that can pass. And we feel like we're making great strides and great progress on getting a bill that can pass because it incorporates the kinds of feedbacks from members from all walks of life in our conference.
Idaho conservative Congressman Raul Labrador took the swipe at the speaker today, saying he should try to play on offense. Quote, I don't think that we're talking about anything about leadership issues, but he does need to figure out what it means to have a majority. I have to be honest, sometimes I give credit to Nancy Pelosi that she knew what it meant to have a majority. Today, the bill took another step, passing the Budget Committee on a 19-17 vote. But three conservatives, Brad of Virginia, Palmer of Alabama, and Sanford of South Carolina, voted with Democrats against the GOP plan. Palmer pushed for tightening up Medicaid soon.
The Affordable Care Act led to the explosion of the program into a permanent welfare benefit for anyone, including the able-bodied and childless. The Medicaid expansion has created a perverse incentive for states to provide benefits to able-bodied adults at the expense of the elderly, the blind, and the disabled.
Democrats continue attacking this bill. House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi suggested Speaker Ryan may force his members to, quote, walk the plank, making them vote for a bad bill. She's not the only critic.
All of the evidence suggests that this bill will worsen every aspect of our health care system and return us to a time before the ACA when coverage was neither accessible nor affordable. The burden is on the Trump administration to prove otherwise.
Ryan says the president is being helpful, trying to rally support. Martha?
Thank you, Mike. So two Republicans, Senator Ted Cruz and House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows, got together to pen an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today where they argue the GOP health care plan simply doesn't go far enough to accomplish the goals. Congressman Meadows joins us now. Good evening, sir. Good to have you with us tonight.
Good evening, Martha. Great to be with you. Thanks.
So do you think they should scrap this and start over?
You know, obviously there are some things that have really been thought out with the speaker in putting forth this. We're not there yet. And I can tell you, I made a promise to the president to negotiate in good faith and really make some substantial changes. But Martha, the real barometer for all of this is that we've got to lower premiums. And if we don't do that,
but doesn't
then we
this
have
bill lower
failed.
Premiums by 10% over time?
You know, if you look at an average 10% over time, but if you look at that, that's really calculating an increase or a decrease in terms of the younger population. And so older Americans, those that are 40 and above, actually will see an increase over a 10-year period. And so it's, according to the CBO, our seniors really have to be careful with this. And so we've got to adjust that to make sure that not only those that are getting protected with this, but those that are not actually get the protection.
So there are some specifics out there that conservatives are pushing for. For instance, work requirements for Medicaid, for able-bodied recipients of Medicaid expansion that would end sooner, 2019 perhaps rather than 2020. Give me some, which things do you think, and I know you spoke to the president about this, and no doubt he told you he wants to get a deal done.
He does.
What did you indicate to him you would be willing to do to get there?
You know, we've laid out a few items that we're willing to, but that op-ed that you talked about that Senator Cruz and I actually put forth talked about the fundamental aspect of this, and those are the insurance regulations under Obamacare. Currently, you have to buy a bronze, silver, gold, or platinum plan, and even when we go through this whole process, you're still going to have to buy those types of plans that are left in terms of the regulations. So for us, it's looking at those regulations, repealing those, and then once we get to that, the rest of it become much easier to negotiate, Martha.
All right. In a word, can this pass? Can you get something through?
You know, not today, but I'm hopeful in the week to come that we're meeting. I know I'm meeting with some of our Tuesday group, our more moderate members, to try to find some common ground.
All right. Thank you very much. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you, Martha.
So here with more, Dan Henninger, Wall Street Journal editorial page editor, who just wrote a piece titled "The GOP's Obamacare Choke," and Juan Williams, co-host of The Five and a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have both of you here. I want to start by reading a little bit of the piece that you wrote, Dan. So let's put that up so that we can share it with the viewers. This was in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Dan writes, maybe in politics, genes really are destiny. Under pressure from a CBO score, the genetic disposition of Republican politicians is to go wobbly. He goes on to say the disposition of movement conservatives is to get out the long knives and start carving up other conservatives. Is that what you think Mr. Meadows doing?
No, I don't think Mr. Meadow is doing that. I think some of at least not tonight, it's very interesting. Some others have been doing that. Raul Labrador saying he admired Nancy Pelosi's, Nancy Pelosi never had anyone in her own party like Raul Labrador trying to carve up the speaker. But Mark Meadow was so interesting tonight because he said, I think we'll get this worked out in the next week. He didn't say weeks. He said 7 days. And I think Congressman Meadow is now committed to the idea that through negotiation, they're going to be able to do some of the things he described in the Wall Street Journal piece that he wrote for us with Ted Cruz. And it wasn't that major, Martha. It was just as you said, moving the Medicare cap up, expansion up about a year, a work requirement for Medicaid, expanding health savings accounts. These are the sorts of things that you would expect to be negotiating in a big piece of legislation like this.
I mean, Paul Ryan spoke very positively about the president this morning. He said, I'm very, impressed with his commitment to get this done. And there's no doubt that Mr. Meadows is feeling pressure from the president. Juan, what do you think about this?
Oh, I think it's interesting to watch President Trump on this because I don't think that he has bought into the plan. I mean, obviously, he's famous for his branding. You notice it's not called Trump Care. I think that he is holding off some distance because I think his top advisors are making it plain. Hey, wait a second. We're not sure this is going to take off, and we don't want to feel like we are loaded down in terms of the Trump brand if this doesn't go forward. I was taken by Dan's piece this morning in the Wall Street Journal. I read it as one of the first things I saw today. And my feeling when I was reading it was, yes, I think Republicans are choking if, in fact, they have been for 7 years condemning Obamacare, and now they have a chance, after all, I think it's 50-plus votes, Martha, to repeal. They have a chance, and they don't do something. But that's the politics of it. And I think your bottom line, Dan, was why would Republicans vote for Republicans in the future if they don't follow through on this?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it sounds crazy to say, but so much of this feels about 2018. I mean, you can feel Democrats, salivating like, hey, if they blow this, we're going to be in good shape.
Consider, we're actually doing real politics again, as people have been describing today. This is the way legislation works. It hasn't worked this way for the last 8 years. Congressman Meadows was elected to the House in 2012. This is the first big piece of legislation he and a lot of his colleagues had ever. It is incredible. And now everyone's beginning to find this is why politicians come to Washington to do negotiations like this, and that's what's happening.
But
this morning I thought the same thing. I was listening to Paul Ryan. He was saying, so it has to get through one more committee. We have 4 committees. Then it goes to the House. Right. Then you have to have a conference. Then it's going to go to the Senate. And I thought this is like a refresher civics course because it's been so long since we've seen any legislation passed, Juan.
Well, you haven't seen any.
Obamacare.
Well, right.
That's
but I'm saying, no, that's not true. But I mean, what you're seeing here is that Republicans are now the governing party, and they have to govern. And that takes, the result is you have to have compromise and consensus in your own ranks if you have the majority, as Congressman Labrador was saying. So my problem with this is it's all about the politics. My difference with Dan is, what about the American people? Because I think the problem is that the Republican plan is inadequate, Martha. I don't think it covers as many people as Obamacare. I don't think it drives down premiums, as you heard from Congressman Meadow. Yeah. Older people especially are going to be ill-served.
If people are unsatisfied, if their health care costs more in the next few years than it cost before,
we've heard, but the Fox News poll
turns out to be the truth, that people are paying more and their coverage is less, believe me, Republicans are not going to get reelected.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think the Fox News poll today had like 54% disapprove.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Pleasure to have both of you here tonight. Developing tonight, some new reaction to the decision by 2 federal judges in Hawaii and in Maryland to reject the revised version of the travel ban. President Trump has vowed to fight on, even the Supreme Court, calling it a, quote, unprecedented judicial overreach. Trace Gallagher has details tonight from our West Coast newsroom. Hi, Trace.
Hey, Martha, the only difference in these 2 federal rulings is the judge in Maryland, Theodore Chuang, only halted the travel ban from the 6 majority Muslim countries. He left the refugee travel ban intact. Judge Derek Watson in Hawaii halted the entire executive order. But instead of ruling solely on what was in the executive order, both of these federal judges based their decisions on statements Donald Trump made on the campaign trail, like this. Watch.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
The judges said those types of statements supported claims by the states that this travel ban amounted to religious discrimination. The judges also took into account comments made last month to Fox News by Trump policy advisor Stephen Miller, who said the new travel ban was fundamentally the same as the old travel ban. And it now appears that President Trump never wanted to rewrite his executive order to begin with. Watch.
This is a watered-down version of the first one. This is a watered-down version. And let me tell you something. I think we ought to go back to the first one and go all the way, which is what I wanted to do in the first one.
But going all the way to the Supreme Court might now include a few more stops, including back to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has ruled against the administration once, and the Fourth Circuit Court, which covers Maryland. The DOJ says, quoting, the president's executive order falls squarely within his lawful authority in seeking to protect our nation's security, and the department will continue to defend this executive order in the courts. But while the DOJ wants the courts to focus on the president's authority, so far the courts have focused on whether the president's order is discriminatory.
There's a lot of questions about that. Trace, thank you. So here with more, Katie Pavlich, townhall.com news editor and Fox News contributor, and Michelle Giwando is the legal progress vice president at the Center for American Progress. Thank you both for being here tonight. Welcome, ladies. It struck me again when I listened to President Trump in Nashville last night, and Katie, I want to start with you on this. It was revealing, I thought, that he said, I didn't even want us to have a second order in the first place. I wanted to stick with that first order. And now he ends up pretty much in the same place. And perhaps he was perturbed with somebody who, urged him, like, we have to rewrite this order. We have to try again. Because he wanted to stick with the original version. He wants this to go to the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, after the first order was struck down, the administration repeatedly said from the White House that they were going to fight this and appeal the first decision. And then the advisors got involved and said, look, we should just issue another one, avoid the court fight. First, for the reason of it would expand past the 90-day temporary period. And second, because they thought that they would lose based on the arguments that were made the first time around. But the second time around, they did tailor it to the complaints from the court. And when you look at the way that these judges came up with their decisions, they're not basing their decisions based on constitutionality. They're basing them on campaign statements. And as law professor Jonathan Turley, who is not a conservative, said this morning, there's a lot more case law to fall on the side of the president here than there is to fall on the side of campaign statements.
Yeah, Michelle, that stuck out to me as well. Jonathan Turley and Alan Dershowitz both look at this and they say, there's a lot of essentially emotion around these judges' decisions, but it will stand up. The president does have the right to ban entry from countries if he deems them to be a national security risk. It's in 1952 law.
So, I think I've shared with you, Martha, my mother is a minister and my dad is an attorney. So my entire life I've been guided by two things, the law and our values. And the Constitution has made clear that this executive order is fundamentally un-American. I think no matter what law you refer to, and that's why you see these judges saying so clearly, it is a violation of our constitutional values. And that is why when we see this as it continues to move through the many different district courts and appellate courts and potentially the Supreme Court, we are going to hear people say this is unconstitutional and it is a violation of our American values.
But, just reading from the law, law says that it gives the president the power to suspend or impose restrictions on the entry of foreign nationals if it determines their entry would be detrimental to the interests of the United States. And these were the same countries, a similar group, that President Obama deemed to be a national security threat, Katie.
Right. I mean, there's nothing unconstitutional about keeping foreign nationals from failed states like Yemen, Syria, Libya, Somalia, where there is a very severe problem with terrorism and terrorist organizations saying they're going to use the refugee stream to get fighters to the United States. We've seen this happen in Europe. There's nothing unconstitutional about the president using his authority, which is written in U.S. code, to keep those people out, and this is not permanent. This is something that was temporary, and I think that the Justice Department is going to appeal this. Attorney General Sessions has more of his team in place now, and so they're going to fight it, and I think that it'll come out on a positive side for the administration.
Well, there's no doubt that campaign words can come back to haunt you, and that's what happened in the first couple rounds here. Michelle and Katie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Martha.
So still ahead, two separate incidents, both resulting in ugly attacks against First Lady Melania Trump. We will show you the fallout on this coming up. Plus, after some in the media gave President Trump's speech some poor remarks last night, we'll show you what they had to say, and then we'll look at the dials with Lee Carter when we come back. So last night, President Trump gave a big speech in Nashville, and it was received differently from different aspects of the audience. Many in the media panned the president's remarks last night. Here's a sampling of that.
It was a campaign rally, the kind of which we saw over and over again last year for Donald Trump. The only difference tonight was that reality has hit his politics, his pledges, his rhetoric.
Donald Trump also said tonight that the Republican health care bill is not a finished product. In other words, Donald Trump now is committed to absolutely nothing in his own health care bill.
I mean, he is quickly turning into President Dog Ate My Homework. The buck stops somewhere over there.
So that's what they thought. So we asked the pollster Lee Carter to commission a focus group and see how actual viewers and watchers and voters out there felt about it. Watch the reaction of Republicans shown on the red line, the independents on the yellow line, Democrats on the blue line, and watch how they move in response while the president talks. Take a look.
I want to get to taxes. I want to cut the hell out of taxes. But before I can do that, I would have loved to have put it first, I'll be honest. There is one more very important thing that we have to do, and we are going to repeal and replace horrible, disastrous Obamacare.
Pollster and communications strategist Lee Carter conducted the focus group, and she joins us now. It's fascinating to watch the dials move.
It is.
Word to word, phrase to phrase. What did you see in that?
So what you can see there, Republicans have not missed a beat. They are with Donald Trump the whole way. We're seeing independents soften just a little bit, not a lot, a little bit. I think they're waiting to see some action here. Democrats across the board have come. They've never supported Donald Trump. They're not coming around. And you can see that he's not even trying to get them around with these kinds of messages. But I think the important thing to watch is the independents softening some.
All right, let's take a look at the next one, which is on the travel ban, which we were just speaking about. Let's see how people reacted to that.
This ruling makes us look weak, which, by the way, we no longer are, believe me. Just look at our borders. We're going to fight this terrible ruling. We're going to take our case as far as it needs to go, including all the way up to the Supreme Court. We're going to win. We're going to keep our citizens safe. And regardless, we're going to keep our citizens safe. Believe me.
So you can see there, Republicans off the charts. They are so on board with this travel ban. On the other hand, Democrats are so on the other side, because when you talk about it, what Republicans and independents too, you could see they were responding very favorably to this. They're saying this is about national security. Let's put America first. The Democrats are saying this is a humanitarian issue. It's not about Americans first, it's about all people first. And so it's a totally divided issue, and you cannot get Democrats to move over no matter what Republicans or independents think.
So there was one area where it was a little bit closer. Let's take a look, because remember that one of the big thrusts last night was to talk about school choice, a very important issue in this country. It goes right to the heart of how people feel about education. Watch this.
Medicine. We will give our children the right to attend the school of their choice, one where they will be taught to love this country and its values.
So I was shocked last night when he was talking about school choice. We saw Republicans, of course, were supporting it, independents supporting it. Democrats across the board last night said this is an issue that they were optimistic about. This is something that historically and all throughout the election, people have said Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing about education. They did not support the education secretary, and yet here they are saying that choice is a good thing in education. also, I think it's important to remember during his speech to the joint session when he said education is a civil rights issue of his time. This is something that's bringing people together. And I think we see it here.
And Betsy DeVos is big on school choice, and even some Democrats seem to be on board with that. Very interesting. Lee, thank you so much.
Anytime.
So still ahead tonight, First Lady Melania Trump lands in the center of two ugly attacks, one of which claims the only reason her citizenship status went through was her husband's squeaky clean tax return from '05. The other one was so outrageous that we are hesitant to mention it, honestly. But we will touch on it briefly in a tasteful manner with these two great folks, Mike Huckabee and Lisa Booth, coming up next. So developing tonight, First Lady Melania Trump becomes the subject of two attacks. The first set off by a disturbing music video from rapper Snoop Dogg depicting the shooting of a man in a clown suit resembling Donald Trump. Less incendiary attack was from MSNBC host Rachel Maddow, who in defending her report on Donald Trump's '05 tax return suggests that the reason it was so squeaky clean, which was somewhat of a surprise to her, must have been because it was the year of Melania Trump's citizenship status when she was trying to attain that. Joined now by Mike Huckabee, former Arkansas governor and Fox News contributor, and Lisa Booth, president of High Noon Strategies. Welcome to both of you. Good evening. It's usually sort of understood. You don't go after first ladies. You don't go after families. This has been happening on a fairly regular basis to most members of the family for the Trumps. Governor Huckabee, what's your take?
Well, it's been historical that we don't let people just go off on the families because they're not on the ballot. They didn't ask for this. And Melania Trump is a beautiful, classy lady, and the attacks on her are they're obscene. And some of them, frankly, I think are felonies. When you start specifically talking about violent acts and misogynist kind of activities toward a person of a prominent position, I mean, it's just disgusting. And this guy, Bow Wow, what a bad dog. Take away all the bones, make him, go underground. I mean, what a goober. For him to go out and think somehow he's important and he even has a right to say it. It's just disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, it's reflective of the crude, crass world that we live in. That this guy has, I looked him up on Twitter, he has 3 million followers. So that's how many people saw that repulsive and disrespectful and every other adjective you can think of thing that he put out there. I wonder how he would feel if that was said about a member of his family, Lisa.
Well, absolutely, Martha. But there is a clear it's not just a reflection of what society looks like now. It's also a reflection of the double standard that exists. If you remember back in 2014, there was a Republican staffer who wrote on her own Facebook page something critical about President Obama's daughters, mainly just surrounding the way they were dressed. She was hounded by news reporters. She had to resign. She was made into an international news story. There were TV stations outside of her house. But what have we seen done to the Trumps? We've had the comment from Bow Wow. We had Snoop Dogg literally shooting the president in a music video. We had Madonna thinking about blowing up the White House. We had that SNL writer writing something horrible about Barron Trump, who's only 10 years old. But yet these comments are completely excused because it's about President Trump as opposed to President Obama.
I just want to talk a little bit about the '05 tax return, which Rachel Maddow has had to sort of do a dance with because it didn't turn out exactly the way that she anticipated it would. She says 2005 is the year that Mr. Trump married his lovely wife, Melania. This was their first jointly filed tax return as a married couple. And then she noted that at the time, Mrs. Trump was not a U.S. citizen, but a green card holder. And she goes on to say that maybe, that was a very important piece of evidence in that whole process. That's a lot of reading into that tax return, Governor Huckabee.
The great philosopher Ron White says you can't fix stupid. And that's just stupid. To think that Donald Trump paid $38 million just so his wife could get citizenship. Donald Trump isn't that stupid, but the guy, Rachel Maddow, is for saying it. Look, if Donald Trump wanted to spend some money just to grease the pathway, he could have probably done the old-fashioned way and just made a few political contributions, and that would have taken care of it. You don't pay $38 million. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Good grief, that's off the rails.
Just about 15 seconds, but Lisa, weigh in before we go.
Well, I think she is trying desperately to excuse the embarrassment that happened last night. All we found out is President Trump's very rich, and he's paying more than the average person making the money that he makes.
We got to go. Thanks, you guys. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Martha.
We'll be right back.
Thanks.
So we leave you on this St. Patrick's Day Eve with this today from the president. It is the quote of the night. Watch.
Always remember to forget the friends that proved untrue. But never forget to remember those that have stuck by you. We know that, politically speaking. A lot of us know that. We know it.
Can't make it up, right? So we had to do St. Patrick's Day today because tomorrow is apparently Germany Day at the White House because Angela Merkel is coming to town. Have a good night tonight, everybody. Thanks for being with us. Bill O'Reilly is up next. We'll see you back here tomorrow night at 7 o'clock for the first 100 days.